Well, hello, friends. Hi, this
Greetings.
is the Game Theory Podcast. This is episode 103. How you doing, David?
I'm incredibly satisfactory today.
Satisfactory. You're a factory of status.
I'm a factory of status, yes.
What if you said sadist factory, and then people would think you're actually very happy, but you're actually dishing out hate and pain. Sadist factory.
I'm a sadist factory. That's you gotta enunciate because that could be a misunderstanding.
I'm gonna start trying to slip that into places. I remember me and a couple of it was me and Steve and Bobby and I can't remember who else. We had this game where we tried to slip in incredibly offensive things into conversations. That was the game. So
It's like the evolution of our college game where we'd be in the computer lab and we would type messages to each other and you had to say it like progressively louder than the
back when computer labs were a thing. Yeah, like we went down there and there was like I remember that there was a big girl. She was a big black girl sitting to my left. And then she was like right in between both of us. And I'd be sitting on there, and this was back in like ICQ, or maybe it was like, MSN Messenger or whatever. And back in those days, and you just type a word, and what was the one I had to say?
It was like floppy flappy balls or
yeah, flippy floppy balls, and then you had to just say it like in the dead quiet of it was just like "Squilla de la scrotum sack." And they're like, "Excuse me?" You're like, "Nothing." You just keep typing like nothing's wrong, and you have to not laugh. It was awesome.
And we're just sending messages back and forth. And the other rule was you had to say it slightly louder than the person before you.
Yeah.
So at the end, you're just like, scrappy, scrappy, sloppy balls. Just as loud as possible.
Exactly. This is like an evolution of that because we would, I remember one time we were, I was working landscaping with Steve, one of my buddies, and we're working in the back of this yard, and the lady comes out, one of the owners of the house, and she's like, hey, I just want to check out the progress. And I was like, oh, it's time. This is the perfect high stakes, right? She's our boss, basically, right? Contract there. I was like, this is a perfect time for that game. So I was like, hey, yeah, we're working on right here, and if you can notice down here in this trench here, that's where we lay down all the herpes. And she's like, and I'm like. Basically what that means is we had to like level it out really well, and then, and of course Steve, was like, oh, and he's trying not to laugh next to him, and then I'm like, you go. So then he's like, well, yeah, and right here, this is a retainer wall. A lot of times the retainer walls, you gotta like pound these stakes inside of it, and that's where the penis goes. And then so we just drop them in there, and you can tell she was like, it sounded like you said, but we were just totally. Because I would go, yep, that's that. You have to do that, and like just affirm it. So oh man, it was hilarious. But now I'm gonna have to use sadist factory, a sadist factory for sadists. But that is not what this episode is about. Being a factory,
not remotely,
not even a little bit. Yeah. So, dude, I have I've been reading so many articles. That's not a good sign when this is my job and I'm doing that sound.
Yeah, that was one of the factors when I was looking into academia as a full-on career. And I was like, wait, do I enjoy reading articles and or writing them? And the answer to both was no.
Exactly. I could never be a faculty member. I don't get it, man. I just don't get it. You have to like work like 80-hour weeks, or maybe it was more. I can't remember the average work week for academics, but
well, and it's getting worse because they're trying to cut costs, so they basically won't let you get tenure anymore. It's almost impossible to get a tenure track position. So you're an adjunct for your whole life and no security. And even worse, they're starting to replace even adjunct professors with these things called graders. Well, they'll just have like a PowerPoint presentation and they'll pay somebody like $400 a semester to just grade papers, and that's all they do for the class. Like the class teaches itself through PowerPoints.
Oh my God.
So I don't know. I just read an article about this guy who's actually quitting his tenure track position because he's like, yeah, this academia is fucked in America. I'm out.
God damn it. We need to get our shit together. What is going on here? These I've already seen self-paced classes, which I actually enjoyed when I was in undergrad, except for I took a what was it called? It was a math class and it was a super high level one. I fucked up. I don't know why I took this, a self-paced one. It was like irrational
Introduction to rational integers.
Yeah, it was like, or maybe it was irrational number. It basically was some complex, crazy shit. Because I thought I liked math. You know, when you're young and you're like, I'm smart, and I think smart people like math, right?
Right, that's what they do.
Yeah, and so I took math, and I took all my requisite math classes for a science track, and then I was like, I'm going to go a little further for an elective because I'm stupid. I also took like 6 sciences because I was curious, and those were fun because they have labs. It's an intro class to physics or whatever. It's not this shit. And so we walk into this lab and sit down, and I look at this computer, and they're like, "So good luck." And there's not even a teacher. It's just someone who checked your ID. And so I was like, I sit down on the computer, and I'm like, "What the fuck are these symbols?" And so, and this is like day 1, and so I'm kind of clicking around, or no, it wasn't.
Like weird hieroglyphs. It's like a bird with like a sun coming out of it.
Yeah, plus raw equals alligator face.
Equals alligator face.
And I'm like, I think this is hieroglyphics. No, but I
What
walked in
class
there,
is this?
it was clearly a student athlete behind the desk because he was a big old guy with huge muscles, and like these dreads, and he was just like, no words, because I'm like, hey, is this the irrational number quantification? I don't know, some kind of bullshit. Basically, it's like way high, and he's like. Mm-hmm. And anytime a math class has the word theory in it, don't take it. Don't learn from my stupid mistake. I had to drop that class because I'm just sitting there reading, and I'm like, I don't even understand the instructions. It was so bad. But,
it's in weird Sanskrit, like the instructions.
Because it just assumes that you're not white because white people don't do math that well.
It's like the Stargate alien like dialogue. No, it's the Star Wars font. The weird Star Wars.
yeah. Like, and your tutor is R2D2.
You have to learn binary to understand the TA.
I went in at like the second week too, because here's Mr. Cocky, right? Because right before that I took it was like calculus 2 or 3 or something, one of the higher ones, and I did okay, even though it was a Russian lady that I couldn't understand. So I thought, oh well, I'm Mr. Math, right? No, I'm not fucking Mr. Math. I failed. So I went in week 2, and like you said, it's Sanskrit. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I hate my life, and I'm no longer smart. So, anyway, that's not what this episode is about either.
No. What?
Not even
let's talk about
remotely.
more things the episode's not about. So Bernie Sanders.
Dude, yeah, he's so good. And Stephen Colbert started the Late Show, so that's a thing.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an article I came across. So I came across a lot of articles, and most of them are shitty. It's about like consumerism in healthcare, which is not fun to talk about, so I'm not going to.
No.
But it's like about how people select their physicians and psychologists, and most people are just fucking automatons, which I don't want to hear. It's like 75% of people just go, "Oh no," and they just pick someone and they never question it. So
Sure.
it's not cool. But one of the articles that was interesting was about our interpersonal, like how people behave differently to people based on what they expect. And
So how our expectations color our interactions with people.
yeah, and like it's a niche. I always feel douchey if I say niche. Is that douchey?
Niche?
It's correct, right?
Sounds kind of douchey.
Okay, stay away from it.
Kind of feel like you're being a douche right now.
On a scale of 1 to Entourage, how douchey am I? But
Full on arty.
okay, so niche. It's a little niche part of psychology, but pretty fundamental of like perception is reality, right? Like that's in philosophy too. But it always astounds me about how drastic reality has changed, like your objective or your subjective understanding of an objective reality is based on like expectations and perceptions. It's incredible. Anyway, but in the article, what they did was this is pretty cool. So I'll talk about like the article, and then we can interpolate or extrapolate.
Let's extrapolate this time.
Yeah, this sounds pretty douchey too. So we'll just move that over to gaming.
Let's interpostrap.
Extrapolate.
Extrapolate. By the way, I looked it up. The American Heritage Dictionary and Merriam-Webster both list several pronunciations. You can say niche, niche, or niche. So just whichever one sounds the least douchey, go with that.
What is up with dictionaries nowadays?
I know, they just want to make everyone happy. There needs to be an Académie Française, but for English, where they just like throw down the law and say, this is how it's going to be, fellas.
Yeah.
None of this evolving language nonsense.
Yeah, YOLO was in the dictionary. It entered like whatever the same like month that the Lonely Island made a that video of YOLO, because I remember thinking, well, that's just shitty. They're making fun of the word, and now it's an official word. In English. God, English is fucked up. Anyway, in this experiment, so this is pretty cool, and I've got my handy dandy book here. This is a book full of fucking experiments. Who does that to their students? Why do that?
Wait, fucking experiments. That sounds like something that the that guy who was measuring people's sexuality with like shady experiments on campus. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
There's like there's a psychologist. He's got the Kinsey. It was a Kinsey.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he just did a lot of really shady stuff. He's just like, we're having sex experiments, and then like
experiments.
Yeah, and it was a little bit. An ethics board would frown upon some of the things he tried to do.
That's putting it lightly. He fucked most of his grad students. That guy. I mean, I understand, like, if you're a little weird and you're curious about sexuality, that's what drives you to that part of research. It's like why I study video games. I'm curious about it. It always makes me curious because there's one of our faculty members who studies S&M, BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochism.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's a sadist factory. She's sadist factory. But and she studies that, and I'm like, is that like your thing with your husband, or and
it's like a thing you're into? Like, what brought you here?
Yeah, and I try to think about it because it's the same way. Like, whenever I remember making this argument, I used to be like, "Dude, why do you have to be so gay?" Because then I just like think about you guys doing it, and it's like gross. And then they're like, "Don't think about us doing it. That's weird. Do you do that with everyone?" I'm like, "No, that is pretty weird. Yeah, that's kind of my thing.
That's on me."
Now I'm trying to be conscious of that. Just don't think of that stuff. Just be like, okay, good for you, and then move on. But anyway, this is not about that either. Not even remotely. Basically, they took some people in, and let me get the specifics here. But they wanted to see like how. So, have you ever heard of these people who are called introverts and extroverts?
I've heard of them. Yes. Apparently, according to Facebook, introverts, they want to be around you, but they also want to be left alone sometimes because it drains their batteries to be around people too much.
Yeah, and I can't remember if we've talked about that on this podcast. I think we have. But let me just put it this way. That's all bullshit. That has to do with like old school personality psychology from like the 1930s and 40s, and it's just not.
Some Jungian nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's a useful like litmus test of like how your social functioning is going. But as far as like if there are certain human beings that like a large majority of human beings that are or large minority maybe, but a large chunk of people that are kind of meant to be on the outskirts of human beings, it's just not true because like evolutionarily it doesn't make any sense. There are people like 1 to 2 to 5% or so, depending on what disorder, but like for example, schizoaffective or schizotypal people, like these are like the hermits, right? Or the people way out on the edge of those do have like a strange.
Old Ben Kenobi, crazy old wizard, lives out on the outskirts.
Exactly. Yeah, like if he had really just been isolated like that. Or did you hear about that guy in Maine? I think it was Maine. He lived out in the woods. He was a hermit that would come and steal things.
Henry David Thoreau.
No, this guy didn't write. But yeah, same sort of thing. Like some people just don't like people. It's crazy. But anyway, I'll have to put that up on the Facebook page if I remember about this hermit guy. But so people, this is what's interesting though, is a lot of times I've noticed this in my own life too, is that if I go to a situation, or for example, I'm kind of curious about this with you as well. Whenever I was in school, I was kind of the funny man of my family, which is like being the winner of the Special Olympics. No, but that's kind of what that's like. Because I'm like, I'm the funniest guy in my family, but it's
the funniest
like
guy of these 5 people.
Yeah, and but then at school I was super quiet, like very quiet. Like I didn't say anything. I kind of tried to blend into the background. I was really shy. Were you like that too?
Yeah, I would be. Depending on my setting, I would be either like the life of the party or just trying to blend in.
Yeah, me too. I found that a lot, and I noticed in certain situations it's that way as well. Like here in the South, I really don't fit in. Like whenever we go to social functions, I try. I'm like, hey guys, what's up? And actually, that already sounded douchey. But like if we're saying something, and I make a joke, I'm like, well, that's probably because of blah blah blah, and then they're just like, mm-hmm, and I'm like. Okay, that was a joke. And I'm like, that was a joke. It's supposed to be amazing. But
They're just like stonewall faces.
Yeah, they just let you flounder, and I'm like, okay, so there's no sense of humor here. But then they'll say something like, well, then that's just because I skinned a deer, and that's what happened. And everyone's like, they love it.
Skinned a deer.
You know how it is skinning live animals. But anyway, I've noticed that I'm kind of that way. Well, some of these psychologists decided to test this. So what they did was they brought in guys and girls, and what they told them was that, hey, this is we'll see how this relates to video games in 1 second, but they said so okay, so you're going to be talking to someone on the phone because this isn't, face to face, as it turns out. We want to see, or what they said was there's two conditions. Some people talk face to face, other people talk over the phone. We want to see if people can make friends over the phone differently from face to face. And as it turns out, obviously nobody did face to face. They were just saying that. And they brought people in and they had them talk on the phone. Now, they also said, to get to know the person, you only have a few minutes to talk. So we're going to, fill out this little biography sheet. So, just say something about yourself, what grade you're in, or what year you are in college. And just about like what you like, what's your major, what do you want to do in life. And then they said, and we're just going to take a quick picture of you. Well, the girls, they did not take pictures of. They told none of the girls that they were going to take pictures. But the guys, they did. They said, they said, yeah, we're going to take pictures, and they'd snap a Polaroid. They didn't show the pictures of the guys to anyone, and the pictures of the girls were actually from a community sample. They just had people come in for $5, and can we take your picture? And we'll basically rate how hot you are, which is really shitty because they have a representative. You got to have that normal curve, right? So you got to get the mugs too. The mugs. It's a technical term in psychology.
Yeah, psychologists call them mugs. It's just it's a way to classify them on a normative basis.
Yeah. So from Jennifer Aniston to Ugg, I'm gonna say you're somewhere near the Gilbert Gottfried. Did you hear about him doing the 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes. He looked at me caressingly and lovingly stroked.
Yeah. Oh man, the moist spot between my legs. So ridiculous.
Oh man, some sexy narration.
I know, man. I want to buy that audiobook. Apparently, did the whole thing. Like it wasn't just a joke, but or it was, but he went way too far with it, as you did back in the day. For example, I'm going to take this as a small tangent. We were driving to the Wendy's, through the Wendy's drive-thru.
Now, some background here. In college, we were still experimenting with what makes humor work, and we stumbled onto the idea that the farther you take a joke beyond where it's appropriate, like the funnier it gets.
Yeah, or no, it's more like, remember, we had like analyzed this. Like I think we may have figured it out, or we just had a crazy theory that doesn't work. But what we figured out was things are really funny, and then there's kind of this valley where it's not funny anymore. And then if you stick
push
with it
through
long
it,
enough, if you push through it, it gets funny again. And so you were testing that. That's what was going on. So we're driving through the Wendy's, the drive-through, and what was it that even instigated your ire?
I don't know. You just said something randomly mean to be funny, like I don't know, like your mom joke or something. Like not even that mean, just borderline like friends messing with each other mean.
Yeah. Yes, I said something like, "Well, you don't even. Well, I guess we're not best friends anymore, David."
Yeah, it was something like that.
Why don't you just shut up or something? And we're waiting in the line to get food. You just like make eye contact with me, like you're just so offended and angry, and then you just open the door, and David just starts running like across the parking lot. He just runs, and I'm like, "Oh, that's." And I laugh. I'm like, so here's the graph, right? We're in the funny part, and I'm like, that's hilarious. And and there's a whole line of people behind us and in front of us. They're all looking because this crazy man in front of this car. And then he jumps over. So next door to this Wendy's is the Sonic. He jumps the wall and like falls down 10 feet. And I'm like, oh, man, it's gonna be difficult to get back up that wall, David.
It was like into a dumpster.
Yeah, he jumped straight into a dumpster, and I was like, what? And here comes the moment of like that weird valley of like, wait, what? And so I'm just sitting there staring at this dumpster that's like half closed, and there's all these people looking out their windows, and this strange guy just ran into a dumpster, and
I'm not kidding, like heedlessly head first.
Yeah, it gets to the point where the line starts moving forward, and I'm like, what, dude? Really? Because I'm his ride. I'm your ride. And we drive forward, and then they're like, "Here, it's so much money." I'm like, oh, "I guess I'm paying for both of our food." Like, I don't know where you are. So I just pay it. And then they're like, okay. And then we slowly make our way to the food. It's been like 5 minutes. I don't know what to do.
You're wondering if I'm okay.
I started to think like maybe there's like truth to like alligators and dumpsters. I don't know. And so I get the food. I'm like, I hope I'm super hungry because I got enough for 2. And I'm looking over there, and it's been like 5 minutes. And that's when David's head pops out of the thing. And he's like, "Oh, I'm just kidding." And he comes back, like trash on his feet and stuff. It was hilarious. And so that was part of that like uncanny valley of like, hilarity. I don't remember how that relates to our study. But
yeah. So,
anyway. So
I feel like triple tangent. We went from Gilbert Gottfried to taking the joke too far to Wendy.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Gilbert Gottfried took the joke too far by recording the whole thing. And so there's going to be a point where you're listening to it and you're like, this isn't funny anymore. But if you keep listening, it'll probably be like, this is hilarious. He really took this way too far. But that became your thing for a while, taking jokes too far.
Yeah. Just see how far you can take them.
Anyway, but what happened with this experiment? So they took pictures of the girls. They took pictures of the guys. They said they took pictures of the girls, and then they actually took pictures of community samples and kind of normed them, right? They had independent observers come in and say how hot or not these girls were, on a scale of 0 to 10, maybe 1 to 10 if they were being like, hopefully no one can be a 0. Yeah, so they got a good picture or a good spread of like, beauty. And then, as you can probably predict, they switched. So they gave the girl on the other side of the phone the biography, but showed no picture. And then the guys, they gave the biography, the real biography of the person they're talking to, but they manipulated the picture. So whether it's someone who's good looking or, as I mentioned before, the scientific term, an UG. Mm-hmm. And so, and everywhere in between, right? So you got this gradient of people who look good. And how do you think people behaved when they talked to hotties versus naughties?
Another scientific term.
Yeah.
Well, I would predict that the guys would suddenly be way more interested in laughing more often at the jokes of the hotties than of the Uggs.
Yes, as it turns out, that's true. And let me give you the specifics. The specifics of the of what how they rated them, because afterwards, they took a few different measures of like, how was this person generally? Did you get along with them? And then how do you rate them as a person? On these different levels or different qualitative words, like are they sociable, were they awkward, things like that.
Right.
But the hotties, the men who thought they were talking to someone who's good looking, actually described them as sociable, poised, humorous, and socially adept. They were like, "Oh yeah, dude," just because they saw a picture. And they had the same, on average, they had the same conversations with these people. And then the people that were the people who weren't so attractive, the Uggs, they said that they were unsociable, awkward, serious, which I guess is a bad thing, and socially inept. So
now were the girls, were they what do you call it, collaborators in the study? Were they Confederates?
Oh, no.
Or were they just random? Like, were they reading from a script, trying to keep everything the same except for the picture?
No, they thought about. I assume they thought about that, and here's why I wouldn't do that as an experimenter, because you get practice effect. The more times whenever we try to tell jokes we've already told on this podcast, it never goes well. Mm-hmm. Like if we're talking in casual conversation and we say something funny and I'm like, oh man, that's video game related, or for the other podcast, oh, that's that related. So we should talk about that on the podcast. It's never as funny. You just can't recreate that magic. And so I think that's what was happening here. They thought, on average it should even out, and as long as we get an effect, a main effect for, attractiveness, then we should be fine. And so I assume that's what they did there. But you're right, that is one criticism of the study. It's just a weakness, an inherent weakness in methodology of screwing with people rather than rats.
Right.
So if it was a rat, I would have just sawed off the face Joker style and just stapled it to him.
Oh God,
how hot this rat is. Man, I tried to think of a funny celebrity name with a mouse in it or a rat, and I just couldn't. I was thinking Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, nothing. I got nothing. So our audience is probably saying one right now. Anyway, the thing about this is what in psychology we call this behavior. Well, one of the ways we talk about this is behavioral confirmation, which is like we talked about this on the last podcast, or just alluded to it, which is where you get two people who go to a county fair or something, and they both have the exact same experiences. I know it's impossible, but let's pretend for hypothetical reasons.
Okay.
And they come back, and one is depressed and one is not, or one is socially anxious and one is not, or whatever. They're going to give two subjective reports differently. And here's what's fascinating is that they'll also recount. I don't know why that word sounds weird. What's my deal with language today? Anyway, they'll recount two separate times. So you perseverate. So something happens throughout the day, and we actually don't store a lot of things in our memory. And like, for example, we did this with attention. Like, you will show like a video, for example. Have you seen the one about the gorilla, for example? The gorilla walking through.
They asked the people in the experiment to count how many times the ball is passed as these people are going in a circle passing a basketball. And then a guy in a gorilla costume will walk through the middle of it, and then they'll ask how many, they'll be like, okay, so how many times was the basketball passed? And I don't remember what the percentage was, but a lot of people never noticed the gorilla because they'd be like, okay, what else did you notice in this video? And it was like, nothing. I've actually showed that to a classroom full of students just to like try that experiment, and the only students who noticed the gorilla were the ones who had seen that video before.
Yeah, it's something in the 90%, and it's low 90s, but I can't remember the exact. They've done this a lot of different ways too. It was awesome. But anyway, the point is that we don't store. We notice it like in our peripheral vision, but we don't store it into our memory. So if you said, "Did you see this?" they'll say no. But it's not like their eyes don't work. Your peripheral vision works fine. It just doesn't store a lot of things.
That's something important to keep track of. Whereas if you said, "Watch for the strange gorilla," like then everybody would remember it because it's what their brains know to keep track of that.
Right. So we've got this problem with attention. We've got this problem with retention as well, like of what we're keeping in our brain. Because if you say something like, what was happening in the background of that video? Let's say you were showing a movie. We recreate it in our mind. We say, oh, yeah, it was just this movie. And you say, oh, what was in the lower right corner during the whole time or whatever? They'll say, oh, it was this blank, blank, blank. And when in reality, maybe a gorilla was standing there the whole time. They don't know it was in the corner, but they say that we recreate it. That's how memory works. It's pretty incredible. But anyway, the point is that behavioral confirmation. So we can act in a way according to our perception. So we already know our perception's flawed, right? Well, we can act in a way to affirm that. So like in an early example of like some situations were the funny guys, some situations were not. And I imagine a lot of other people that were listening have been in that situation as well. You act according to your perception. So like, let's say I throw out a joke. I say something like, I don't know, something that wouldn't be funny to most people. I don't know, make some video game reference or Star Wars reference. I'm like, I've got a bad feeling about this. And I look around, I'm like, and no one gets it. And I'm like, oh, okay. I can behave two different ways, and I can perceive that two different ways. One way would be, like, oh, crap, this crowd doesn't like my jokes. I better stop making jokes. The other one would be, oh, well, I'm a funny guy, and they missed that. And then I would press on. I'd be like, from Star Wars, am I the only Star Wars fan here? And like just keep pushing it until they made the joke, or next time just make another joke and just be like, oh, I'm still funny. We call that like resilience. I forgot exactly, but it's resilience of some kind. And in general, you can measure this by resilience of people to bad situations. So how does this relate to video games? That's a good question.
Yes.
And it does, because the thing about video games is that when we play video games, this is why I started thinking about this. Whenever I read reviews, I get them all over the place. And now it's to the point where I only read from like one news source or one review source. Because they just fly all over the place. The same thing with movies. Like, you get these people who are like best movie in the world or best video game in the world, worst video game in the world. And it made me think about, like, should we be approaching reviewing games differently? Because you're going to perceive the game. First of all, the hype leading up to the game. Are you even sold on it? Like, you, for Warhammer, I assume you're not like super hyped about it.
I'm not super hyped.
Yeah, and so I am. And then how will that affect my perception? But more importantly, how will that affect my behavior within the game?
So, okay, because that's an interesting question, because I've seen it kind of go both ways. I've seen you go into a game or a movie where you're so hyped about it that there's no way it can live up to the hype, and you become disappointed with what would have otherwise been a satisfactory experience. And I've seen other ways where you go into a game with a lot of hype, and that hype sort of makes it a self-fulfilling prophecy of your expectations of the game are going to be great, and so you're looking for every gem in the game, and maybe if the game is mediocre, you find it great because you're expecting it to be great. So I can see it going either way? Is there something that determines which way that goes?
I don't recall. I remember reading something about that, about anticipation, and then people's subjectives. I think it was about distress though, and it had to do with anxiety and like people who had phobias and things. But I don't really recall. I have to look that up. But what I do know is that okay, so whenever you're in the games, you're having these experiences, and like let's say. Okay, first of all, Batman Arkham Origins. Did you know that didn't get very good reviews?
Yes.
Yeah, and do you know why?
Because of the PC issues is what I was seeing.
Oh, sorry. Arkham. That's Arkham Knight. Arkham
Origins.
Oh,
Arkham Origins. No, I didn't know that one got bad reviews.
Yeah, I know. Did you play through the game?
I did. I enjoyed it.
Me too. I thought it was great. But a lot of people were upset because and here's the reason why this is relevant. Because they said it doesn't live up to the Arkham name. I guess it was outsourced to another company.
Oh.
And but the Troy Baker came in. He voiced the Joker for the first time. Yeah, we got to see Bane. Like it was a good game. It was fun.
I had fun. Yeah.
But a lot of people, because they went in with that expectation, had a different experience. And because of that, they're like, oh, I didn't even explore half the map, is what one of the reviewers said. And I remember thinking, well, then what the fuck? You weren't really reviewing the game then. But then, what is that? The no true Scotsman fallacy? Is it like, well, you're not really reviewing the game, or when people tell me that
anyone who gives a bad review is not actually giving it a fair chance.
Yeah, like if someone paid us, nobody's ever done this, but if someone paid us to review a game, and it was Halo, I imagine I would behave differently in the game than if it was literally any other game, or a game that I'd never heard of, and it was just like Halo, but I didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it just made me start thinking about like how we review games and how we should hype games or how we should talk about games.
So the hype colors the reviewer's experience is what you're saying. Like our preconceived notions of how the game will be are gonna color how we perceive the game to be. But again, I don't know if that makes us more likely to give it a positive or a negative review, because I've seen it happen both ways.
I kind of think it's and this is just me speculating, but I kind of think it has to do with like how on a scale of 1 to 10 of how awesome you think it's going to be,
mm-hmm.
like how high your expectation goes, and then how high you perceive it, and then I think it starts the chasm between those two. Chasm or chasm? What the hell today?
Chasm's good.
That's what I thought.
English is weird. It's like there's no standardized way of pronouncing things. You just have to have heard them said before. You can be really well read and mispronounce everything because you've never heard them spoken out loud.
Yeah. I'll just say chasim.
Chasm.
A chasm. That's how you say it. The chasm between your expectation and then your initial reality, I think that starts to widen, because then you know how we have confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
So you start thinking, well, like a new Star Wars movie's coming out, no one knows how it's going to be.
Right. It could go either way. It could be episode 1. It could be episode 6.
Exactly. And so I don't know. But I imagine that whenever I sit down in the seat, and we can take this as an analogy for video games as well, but right now, just for that, because it's so popular, I sit down in the seat and I think maybe it's going to be a 9. Or some people maybe think it's going to be a 10, but you sit down and you start watching, and I imagine within the first few minutes you'll start to get an impression. Mm-hmm. Like you're like, all right, this is doing okay, but it's not quite as awesome as I expected. And then I think we'll start looking for, as soon as we get that hypothesis, it's not as awesome as I expected, we'll start looking for evidence to confirm that theory, just because we know that's how we work in general. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's how we work in specific here. I don't know.
Yeah, it begs the question. So the ideal reviewer, should he go in with a complete blank slate, like if it were possible to have not heard of like the Halo franchise, and then will that make you a more objective reviewer when you're playing the Halo game because you're not getting biased in either direction?
I don't know, because then it's not really fair to like anything but AAA titles, because if you don't know that you're about to play a Call of Duty and you just plug it in, let's say you've been playing a bunch of indie games, and then you plug this in and you're like, holy fuck, like the graphics are amazing, the audio, the music, the ambiance, the missions, the voice acting, you're just like, fuck me, this is amazing. You may give it an over review. I don't know, like there's almost like you need
a certain level of base knowledge before you can give it a fair shake.
Yeah, or maybe we should just say for a Call of Duty game, this one's not great.
Well, and there's questions of genre too, right? Like, is it fair to compare a game to a different game outside of its genre? Like an indie game to a AAA game, or a like puzzle game to a first-person shooter. Like, is it two apples and oranges at that point?
Yeah, that's a good point. You'll never see a review for like what's one of these puzzle games? I was gonna say like the old school ones like Bogle, but some
Yoshi's Cookie.
Yeah, Yoshi's Cookie. You're not gonna be like thrilling edge of my. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's almost like some caveat that happens no matter what, and however wide or narrow you couch that in is gonna affect you. You know, it's like if you say for a Call of Duty game, this one isn't great, so it's only comparing to the last maybe 4 or 5 Call of Duties.
Right, or for a Zelda game, it's one of the worst ones. But like Zelda games are like pizza, right? Like even terrible pizza is pretty satisfying. It's you're like, pizza, $5, nom nom nom.
Yeah. It's almost like what you're saying that to. So maybe start thinking about maybe reviewers should say that in the beginning. Like, I'm comparing this to all FPSs. In which case, Call of Duty, whatever one that comes out, it may be awesome. But if you say like all video games in general, then it may be super awesome. But if you say like for a military realistic shooter, it's not that great because it didn't do these things. Right. So I think we do that anyway. But I wonder if we were just more explicit about it.
Yeah, you almost have to. It's a weird line to straddle because if you're too specific, there are no genres, right? Like you can't even compare 2 Zelda games because Zelda Link to the Past and Zelda Ocarina of Time are so different on so many levels that it's not really a fair comparison. But at the same time, at some point you have to make a genre to compare things to, because otherwise it's like, this is my favorite 3D Star Fox game ever. And you're like, wow, that's like a category of 2. So it's not that helpful.
Yeah. Speaking of which, that's coming out, and fuck yes, I'm buying it on day one. How about Mario Maker? Speaking of which, not that we do tangents on this show, but is that doing well right now?
Yeah, it's doing incredibly well. It's just from the hype I've seen, there's like news stories about Mario Maker every other day, so people are talking about it.
It's crazy. Someone asked about it on the Facebook page, so we're not on an irrelevant tangent.
Okay, how about this? I just Googled Mario Maker sales, and they sold 150,000 units in Japan in 1 week.
Jeez. That's pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah. It's pretty great. And the Super Mario Maker doubles Wii U sales in Japan. So they apparently, 12,000 people just went out and bought Wii U's that first day it came out.
Holy shit. Well, dude, it's a good console. Like, and remember, again, I said again, which is a douchey thing I hate when people say, because it's like, they've been on the true page the whole time, and they're just trying to get you over there. Again, as I said before, it's just douchey. It doesn't help the conversation, even if you were right. Anyway, but with Wii U, I didn't expect it to be awesome. But damn, that having a tablet in your hand basically just opens up so much stuff, and it's sensitive to gyroscoping. So like you can move it around and it affects the game, and you can blow on it. Which
Mario Maker almost beat Metal Gear Solid 5 in the UK.
Holy shit!
And when you consider how many people own a Wii U compared to how many people own everything else that Metal Gear Solid 5 is out for, that's pretty impressive.
Dude,
the user base is so much smaller.
You know what we should do? We should probably at some point, there's been a lot of talk about this on the Facebook page since probably episode 3 or 4. People want us to do a Metal Gear episode. We should probably get that new Metal Gear, because it's supposedly the last one, right? I guess the maker left the studio. We should probably get that and play it, and then start talking about Metal Gear.
Yeah, and we could put what we were talking about to good use, because I've never played a new Metal Gear game. I haven't played the Nintendo one, the I Fall Asleep one. I haven't played that one either.
Did you play Solid #1, the one on the PlayStation?
No, I didn't have a PlayStation.
Okay, man, yeah, and I did, and I played part 2. I played 3. I didn't. So
we can see if my experience, having never played a Metal Gear with no expectations, will be different than yours having some background in it.
Yeah, I missed the last 2 games, and that was it. And I even played Revengeance, which is the ninja one where you're the bio ninja man with only one eye.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to send us free copies, our address is no.
yeah, and we need to get that Patreon page started up at some point.
Yeah,
just to help mitigate these costs of. It actually costs us money to do this. What are we doing with our lives, David?
It's a hobby.
Yeah,
it's one of those hobbies where you give people free entertainment and you pay for it. Standard hobby.
Yeah, that's what's hilarious too. Like I came home and I was like, Mario Maker, that's so much money. This was literally after me and my wife went out and blew probably $90 on the town on a date night.
Yeah.
Like, and that was one night for what? Booze and like we had these delicious chicken thigh sandwiches and shit like that. But it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's wow, yeah, Mario Maker's doing incredibly well. Yeah, we might have to pick that up, and I would be interested in taking our. This is such a rambly episode, but I'd be interested in taking our theories from the last episode about how to make a good Mario level. You know, the Kinshoku Senken whatever method, and applying those to level design and just seeing if we could make interesting levels that way.
That would be cool. Yeah. Well, maybe that's one way I can talk Amy into getting it. We were talking about waiting until Christmas, but fuck, that's so long away, and it doesn't go down in price.
Yeah, it's like it's going to go on Steam sale.
Yeah. Well, cool. This has been the most weird, like, potpourri episode ever. But, you got some weird videos or some weird stories of David jumping into a trash can, some psychology crap. What else? You know, Mario Maker, Metal Gear Solid, Patreon. I don't know. Anyway,
so I guess the takeaway message is that our expectations color our experiences in games, and I don't know.
And our behaviors.
Yeah, and our behaviors in the games, and I don't know if there's any way to stop that from happening.
Yeah, really. I mean, in psychology, what we do is we do behavioral experimentation, but I don't know the analog to this. So what I would do, and I think we talked about this before, but what I would do was, you know, take someone and say, all right, what do you expect to happen? Exactly. Concrete examples, not theories or like conceptual ideas like I will have fun, but instead like what parts will you have fun with and what will it look like? And then when it doesn't happen, you say, okay, so that these things didn't happen. This is like our academic feminism episode where you have to spell out explicitly what you're expecting before, and then you talk about whether it met that or not, rather than reactionary.
Sure, that makes sense. Like come up with some kind of criteria to judge the game by before you go into it, so you're not just cherry picking the data that supports the conclusion you already made up, the cognitive dissonance kind of cognitive bias conclusions.
Yeah, that would be cool. But anyway, wow,
we can put this to the test because today, later on, my non-gamer friend is coming over as part of the conditions of a bet. She will be playing a video game for the first time, and she's playing The Walking Dead by Telltale Games. And
what? Really? It's her first game?
Yeah. Well, listen. Hear me out. She's big on story, right?
Okay.
She just started watching The Walking Dead. And she has absolutely no coordination or hand-eye or like reflexes. So I figure like a story-based game that doesn't require a lot of platforming or for aiming, stuff like that would be a perfect introduction for her. Plus, you ever have that friend who's watching The Walking Dead and they're just armchair quarterbacking it the whole time, like, come on, Rick, obviously do this, obviously do that. Well, The Walking Dead's a great game because it puts you in that position of like, oh, now it's not so easy, is it? You got to make the tough calls. So and plus it's just gonna be fun to get her reactions to things. So
so like a choose your own adventure, that is a good
start. It's a good non-gamer game. Well, it was between that and Life is Strange because she's such a hipster in her like indie movie taste. Like that would be a perfect game for her. I think she'd have more fun with Life is Strange, but I'll have more fun watching her play The Walking Dead, and really that's what it's all about. So she's gonna exactly. So I gotta. So she's going to play that, and then we're going to have her on in a future episode to talk about her experiences as a non-gamer playing games, and then how video games work as a storytelling medium, because she actually teaches fiction and stories. Like that's kind of her specialty.
Won't it be weird though doing Walking Dead, which is non-fiction, because that will happen?
Yes, it's predictive non-fiction. It's a genre.
Cool. Speaking of future episodes, while we're wrapping this up, I'm in talks with Eric Zimmerman. He's he teaches game design. Someone on the Facebook page mentioned that he would be a good nab, and so I'm nabbing him. What's my English today, David?
Your diction is odd. It's odd diction. It sounds like you were replaced by an alien like body shifter. Just trying to
but I'm not.
That's something humans laugh about. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm nabbing him, and we're just working on scheduling now because we're not going to be
scheduling him is what humans usually say. Just FYI.
Yeah, he's totally going to come on and not get his brain eaten because humans don't do that. But so it should be good, man. Next couple weeks and month or so should be good as long as we can get him on. So
cool.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone joining us. David, Keep it classy. No more dumpster diving.
Yes, I've put those days behind me. Those were my wild freshman college years.
Good. Okay. And everyone else, we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.